So, Federico, such a pleasure to have you here. We have crossed paths a number of times in my 19 years here, and many more on your side. So there is so much to talk about that I would like to kind of speed it up in a few areas that probably already covered because people find it in Wikipedia, and spend a little more time with things that is a little bit harder to surface. And before getting started, this is more also for the audience that we have here. We do this kind of chats very frequently. Some of the feedback that we get, which is also very positive from the audience, that is mostly people, international folks coming to Silicon Valley for a short period of time, is that at the end of the day, the people that founded companies that became very famous, they're kind of normal people, right? They walk, their two legs, two arms, kind of relate, and so they get back with that kind of a feeling that somewhat, somebody that is not saying average, but I can talk to. And I'm pretty sure that today is not one of these days. I think I have the impression that today we'll get back to with the feeling that there is so much more that a person like yourself can actually provide to the world. And so that's I think, as an expectation, just to raise the bar, but that's part of the thing that I'm particularly excited about. So I'm going to run real quick on the curriculum just to get some points straight. Then I want to maybe go in a little deeper in some of the areas that on one side is a little more personal, also as an upbringing. And then we can cover some of the topics on a pure technology side, but most importantly, I want to talk about your present. That I think that is what gets us as excited. So I'm going to go real quick in some of the dates. I might have some dates a little bit off, but for the most part, I think I got it right. So born 1941, Vicenza, Italy. Then you went to a technical school, but then right after that, in 1960, you got the first job at Olivetti. That was probably the very beginning. And then you studied physics after that, so a few years after you graduated there in Padua, right? You studied at the University of Padua. And then you started working with the SGS Fairchild, first in Italy, then it took you to Silicon Valley right away, Palo Alto. We're talking 1968, is that right? Well, actually, when I was born, you landed in California with your lovely wife, started working with Fairchild Semiconductor, with what became then, the seeds for the first microprocessors. Just 2 years after, you did a bunch of stuff already there. That's the other thing that actually got me triggered, is that all these things happen in very short period of time. So some of these jobs were kind of 2 years at a time, and there's so much that happened there. 1970, you're at Intel. That's where you worked on a 4004, 8008, and 8080. 1980, you founded Xylo. And then,
76.
76, I got that wrong.
75.
75, so just 5 years after. So 1980 probably when the Z80 got...
76 was the Z80.
The Z80. Z80 is actually a totally different story. That's where I started actually my first programming. I was high school at the time. 1984, correct me if I'm wrong, communication ecosystem.
Yep.
Started and CEO. 1986, Synaptics, co-founder CEO there. You developed the logic of the first touchpad and what became then the logic for all the first touch screens. So things actually changed everybody's life. Still moving on in the first few years. Then 2003, 2008, Faggin as CEO. And then 2011, that's when you started the Faggin Foundation. Did I get it right?
Yep.
Okay, and we're just in the middle of that. So this is just to set some dates around things that happen and some of the highlights. I think you are one of the, actually probably by far, the person that I've met that got the most prizes, got, I don't know, many different laureate honoris at universities. We were talking about actually Amarone wine, that's also a good prize that you got. So there is so much to talk about that. But I would like to start more on your upbringing, kind of who were your parents and how much they did impact what you are today?
Oh, they definitely impacted my birth. My father and mother came from Isola Vicentina, which is a little more than a village, about 10 miles from Vicenza. It's a farm community mostly. My father, however, my grandfather from the father's side was a carpenter. He had a carpentry shop to make fine furniture. So he had a bunch of people working for him. And I think I got my sort of entrepreneurial seeds from him. My father, on the other hand, was a professor of philosophy and history of philosophy and history in Liceo Classico when I was born. And then he became a libero docente, which is the equivalent of PhD. In fact, it was a little more than PhD in those days, and even as recently as 10 years ago, because you had to have published a bunch of stuff, and you had to really have done a lot of work to do that. And so, he taught at the University of Padua also. At the same time, he was teaching also in Liceo Classico Vicenza. My father, Dad, actually wrote about 40 books.
Oh wow!
He translated the Enneads of Plotino, the 9 books of Plotino, from Greek, ancient Greek, to Italian. So this much translation and then much comments. His last book was actually finished a year before he died. He died, he was almost 89. So, and he wrote the textbook for the licei, for the high school, the classical and scientific in Italy. For philosophy, 3 books that were adopted in Italy, over Italy, and many other books, especially about the idealism from Plotino to Meister Eckhart and Teilhard de Chardin and so on. So certainly that had an influence, though that influence was mostly subterranean, because I was the mechanic of the family, so all I cared was to understand how the machines work. This thing.
That's why you went to technical school.
That's why I went to technical school. My father did not want me to go to technical high school, but I insisted that I had to go there because I wanted to become a aeronautical engineer, perito, which is the way it was, but you had the degree that you get from technical high school in Italy. And but then when I got to my first year, they stopped doing the perito in aeronautical perito. So I had to find something else. And in those days, I was very passionate about model planes, so I could design and build my own model planes. And I started when I was 11. So by 12, actually, I understood exactly what you need to do to create a product, which is imagine it first in your mind, then begin to, draw it and figure out what you want to do, then make a plan, then figure out what you need to make it, buy, all the parts, make a plan, an actual one-to-one scale plan, then you buy the material, you make the parts, you assemble it, you test it, and then you happy. And that I did that so many times that I cannot remember, I cannot tell you, but tens and tens and tens of times, because that was my passion. And that's why I wanted to become an aeronautical engineer. I wanted to design big planes. And I couldn't stand the idea that I had to spend 5 more years after the high school to become an aeronautical engineer. And so I wanted to do it right away.
How were you as a student?
What?
How were you as a student? Were you?
Well, in the middle school, I was an average student because I wanted to make model planes. That's it. They all be Latino, Latin, and the rest of it. But so I was okay, but nothing. But then in the technical high school, with puberty, I became much more sharp in my mind. So I was the best student. I graduated. In those days, I graduated with 85 over 100, and the best student, not in my class, but of the institute, 75 over 100. So I was just
so you're really outstanding.
Completely off scale, because I had 9s and 10s and a few 8s.
While building your planes, by the way.
No, not at that time. No, that last year I worked hard.
You're actually working for.
But I work every year. I was top of the class every year. But no, I was, and I enjoyed, and I was studying a lot of things that were not, they were my own interest. my father had a major library and with all kinds of books, and I was interested a lot in literature, Russian, French literature.
But in philosophy as well at the time, were you studying and getting a little bit of
not at that time. I wasn't particularly interested in philosophy in those days, and but literature and a little bit of. I got to read some books in yoga and this kind of stuff.
Kind of early
in those days, yeah, it was, in 50s, right? Late 50s, mid late 50s. So that was kind of fun, and then I just every book that I could find about computers, transistors, and so on, I would buy. They were mostly French books, and so I would buy those books. And so by the time I was done, I knew a lot more than the average perito in electronics, because of all this work that I've done. Then when I worked for Olivetti when I was 18, 1960, and then all of 81, I designed for 60% of a small computer. And I built it with four technicians that worked for me. They were all older than me.
Of course, because you were 19 at that time, right?
19 at that time. By the time that I built it was 19.
So why Olivetti? Because your passion was.
It was the only. No. I couldn't do aeronautics. It was off the table because they stopped the program on aeronautical engineering. So no, I did radiotechnical, perito radiotechnical, but there wasn't enough of electronics there to really understand electronics.
So that's why Olivetti was a kind of a natural.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that was. As a matter of fact, I could not have designed a microprocessor if I didn't have this experience at Olivetti when I was 19. That experience directed me then to do physics instead of engineering, because I understood enough about engineering that I wanted to deepen my foundation. I was interested in transistors. I wanted to understand how they really work, and to understand how they really work, you need to do deep quantum physics, and so that was why I did it.
So that was
what I did that plus the work that I did at SGS Fairchild after my degree in physics. I had also there I did physics in a little less than 4 years, when typically it takes 5, 6, 7, or 8 years because physics is you have a 1 year. To graduate in 4 years, you had to have finished all the exams in October of the third year, and nobody can do that. I was the only one to graduate in October of the fourth year, and I started in January. So I did the physics.
So you rushed it.
But I'm 110 lode.
Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less then. Are there any books from those years that kind of left a footprint on you in retrospect? Or maybe just more subjects?
No, they were mostly technical books. One that comes to mind immediately is the book on thermodynamics of Fermi, which was, it was written magistrally, really unbelievably well. Some books that I had on Frank, the book of Frank on electromagnetism, for example. I was studying mostly in English texts, even though the Italian texts were in Italian, but they were not, in my opinion, at the level of the best English texts. So that's where I studied, and I did a lot of extra work because I was interested, because I love these subjects. So I've always been fascinated by everything that I did. So for me, it was fantastic to be able to dig into other things. So I by the time I graduated, I could do anything. Really, because my fundamental understanding of the basis was so strong. In fact, I worked for 6 months for a company. I designed a system for trimming thin film resistors. Then I was designing a electron gun to for high power electron gun to for fusing metal. I mean, just crazy stuff.
The beauty of
Beauty
studying
of doing physics.
How do you compare your mind now to the one back then? Because if I have to compare it, I see just on my side mostly negative, kind of decay. How do you compare your mind now, the way you approach problems?
Actually, it's sharper.
How did you get sharper? How can you maintain this sharpness?
Because I got absolutely interested in what I'm doing, even more than I ever been. I've always been interested and passionate, but after the first experience, extraordinary experience of consciousness that opened up my mind to a reality much vaster than what you think reality is, that blew my mind. That just changed like this.
I want to talk about that.
So that experience opened my mind, and then I've been working on trying to understand the nature of consciousness, how it relates to the way we understand physics and the nature of reality and so on. And now I'm developing a model that hopefully will bring light, it will bring more understanding of how reality, what is reality. Because reality without consciousness is not the reality in which we live. We have been taught that consciousness emerges from the brain as a complex system, and that is a big lie. Nobody can tell you how, and we are not even talking about the same thing. So, but it took me 20 years to reach that conclusion, working and try to understand what is consciousness, working on myself, try to understand it, and through this process, my mind became ever more sharp, ever sharper. So that's why I'm not kidding. Because some people get old and they say that they are sharper, and they're actually.
I don't even try to say I'm sharper. I've got more experience. That doesn't mean that I'm more sharper.
No, I mean sharper. I'm writing books, right? And I'll tell you, every week I get a new idea.
Yeah. I want to talk about this epiphany in a second, but before that, just the step of coming here. Silicon Valley probably at the time, something very much farther away than what it is today. Did you have in mind that you would? Eventually land in California, or just totally serendipity?
It was serendipity. Yeah.
And then by the time you got here, just also the practicality of things. Did you know English enough?
I knew English enough.
Fairchild was a big job. I think at the time was good.
Well, I developed the silicon gate technology. It was a completely new way of making MOS transistors that changed the world. That became the only technology to make integrated circuits. In those days, integrated circuits used bipolar transistors, completely different than MOS. And the MOS transistor, they used metal gate, they didn't work very well. I changed the entire game. That technology 20 years later became the only technology to make all the integrated circuits of the world. Silicon gate technology, 1968. And I was 26 years old, and I did it with everything that I learned in Italy.
In Italy before.
Including
what you did for Olivetti at the time, right?
Well, that was cool. No, without that, the first microprocessor was the silicon gate technology, and what I learned at Olivetti became the microprocessor. So the first and second project, which were at 26 and 28, those were the two projects that had changed the world.
Who was the person that picked you from there and said, okay, we need you in California right now?
No. I was sent here. I was supposed to go back up 6 months later.
Mm-hmm. Don't take it as an excuse.
because SGS Fairchild was partly owned by Fairchild. So they had an exchange of engineers. An engineer from Fairchild R&D went to Agrate via.
Okay, so it was just an exchange.
It was just an exchange. But then while I was here, I developed the silicon gate technology. So I was not finished yet. I didn't want to go back. And of course, Fairchild didn't want me to go back, because I didn't finish that project. It was, many understood that this was a transformative project, especially the people that left Intel in July, and left Fairchild in July to start Intel, which took that technology. They tried to make it appear as their technology, that they did it themselves. No, I did it, and I also designed the first commercial circuit with silicon gate, and that was produced at the end of 1968. So in 8 months, I did the silicon gate technology, the first integrated circuits, it became commercial and sold.
How is the process of invention? Because one thing is, building a company, building a product. In your case, it's really invention. So some of the technology is so deeply rooted into a totally, a revolutionary new thing, that including what you're doing today. So I want to understand how is invention coming?
There are different type of inventions. Okay, so I would say that in my growth. I evolved from an invention that was really, it wasn't so much the invention of the product or the technology, but figuring out how to do something. People already understood that you could do much better if you could do this, okay? But nobody understood how to do this. So from where I stood, I figured out what to do. The 2 or 3 missing pieces to go from here to what people already understood that had to be that way. So that was the silicon gate technology. But people had been thinking about it for a couple of years. Nobody figured it out. I did. Okay, and then I also did the whole thing. So I didn't just figure it out. The second invention, the microprocessor, was a little more, because people, it was more in the future. But even then, it was how to do it. And how to do it was to improve the silicon gate technology that I already done, refine it even more in order to be able to do the microprocessor. And that's what I did. The invention where there was nothing before like that, and it was also a new way of doing something, was the touchpad and the touchscreen, which I did much later. I did in the late, actually early 90s. And but I did that together with our best, most creative engineer. So what I did at the time was understanding where the problem was.
But what was the problem?
And the problem was that the trackball, remember the trackball?
Yeah.
Little ball. You guys are too young to remember trackball. But anyway, the trackball was a little ball that you move. Just the mouse, in those days the mouse was a ball that would be entrained as you move the mouse on the table or on a surface. And now they're all optical. But in those days it was a little ball.
We ends up Costa Manini here, so
exactly.
We talked very nicely about the mouse.
Yeah. So if you turn the mouse upside down, you have the little ball, and you move the ball, and then some more. But there's a fundamental problem when you do this, because the fingers are greasy, right? So after a couple of days that you do this, the trackball doesn't work anymore. You move the ball, and the cursor has its own mind, because this little ball entrains some little wheels, and because of the grease, they don't entrain it well anymore. So I identified that as a problem that could be solved with advanced technology, and so I got four or five sharper engineers, and we were meeting once a week, and with the task of finding a solid state solution to this problem. So through this process, I cannot tell you who's the inventor. The group is the inventor, because it was bouncing ideas back and forth, and it was in a climate of game, like a game, like we're having fun, And then 2 months later, we had invented the touchpad and the touchscreen. And the touchpad and the touchscreen have changed the world. We changed the way we interface with our mobile devices. And so they were adopted in '94, then I was also the one that figured out that the touchscreen, the first application, really important application, was in telephones, in mobile telephone. And so we were going to Nokia, Motorola, Ring, showing the touchscreen and showing that you can do gestures and showing how you could use it to do intelligent phones. They would laugh at us. What the hell are you talking about? Get out of here. Okay.
But could you vision at the time
I could
expensive applications?
Absolutely. Asking about invention, right?
But talk about the process of what is the driver, and what,
you have to have vision.
You
have to have vision. That's right. You have to have vision. But then the vision has to be also refined by talking about it, thinking about it, having an interaction with other people, and so on, right? So after 4 years or 5 years, we went to Apple. Apple liked the touch screen; they wanted it. We didn't know for what it was because they were like that. Nobody knew that they were developing it.
What years are we talking about?
Probably there was probably
Steve Jobs was there.
Steve Jobs was already there. The iPod. We were the ones that invented the solid state wheel.
The iPod.
The iPod, because they had a mechanical one, and we actually figured it out, designed it for them, showed them to them, and they adopted it. Then they said they invented it, of course, but that's typical. And so we went with the touch screen. Steve Jobs wanted exclusivity. We said no exclusivity, and it was great because we could not have anybody adopt it. When the iPhone came out, we had the touch screen for everybody else. So we went from $400 million of sales per year to about $2 billion. Not bad, right?
That doesn't start as. Did you have any receiving partner on this side? I mean, also socially, we met with some of the representatives of the first wave of Italian entrepreneurs or managers, in the time of Logitech or Olivetti. Was there a community here, or was
it was relatively small. I mean, for example, engineers that I knew probably most engineers that were here from Italy in the, let's say, mid-70s. I don't think that there were more than 20 or 30. Now they're probably in the thousands.
Easily,
right?
yeah.
So much of the immigration has happened in the last 20 years. In those days, there were many jobs in Italy. People did not need to work elsewhere. But I was in the board of Logitech for many years before.
So there was a natural connection.
There was a connection. Yeah.
So innovators came from there, or Olivetti.
Olivetti was 73, 74, and then Olivetti. But those were they were here, but then they would go back, right?
Right. So it was temporary.
So it was a temporary assignment. But it was really the beginning. In some ways, Olivetti planted some seeds here with the R&D that they had in those days. The R&D probably lasted, probably 6-7 years. Actually, a number of them, people that worked at Olivetti, stayed, and many, when they closed the lab, many that were here stayed. So that was a big increase in number.
So now I want to start talking about the present and potentially the future. And you mentioned that you did have, an epiphany. We're talking in 80s? 1990. So let's talk a little bit about that and what was that driven by and what was the after epiphany.
Yeah. Well, when I started Synaptics, the idea was to create a cognitive computer. So in those days was the beginning of the second wave of neural networks. So the company started in '86, and I came up with the idea to create emulators of neural networks using floating gate transistors. So with one transistor, you could have a memory about 3 bits worth of it, a multiplication, an addition, and all in one transistor. And so we could do emulation of neural networks instead of doing simulation of neural networks much more conveniently, and also the speed with much lower power and much higher speed. So there was about almost a factor of 1 million in speed, because the computers in those days were not fast enough to do simulation.
Let me interrupt you for a second, just to also get a sense of those times. Who was using neural networks at the time? Because I was using it as a researcher.
No, but that was a research subject. But but I latched on that, and I realized the potential. And of course, on top of that, the artificial intelligence community was dead set against neural networks. They were thinking that was the most stupid idea that you could have. Okay, Marvin Minsky, those kind of guys. The high priests of the artificial.
I was working here with Joe McCarthy.
Joe McCarthy, same shit, yeah. Sorry.
Same thing.
Misspelled. So basically the idea was no good. In those days, it was expert systems was the future, and of course I consider expert system silly because we think we are expert, but we don't know how to express our expertise in rules. So that's exactly what these neural networks do. They find the rules that you don't know where they are. In fact, even after you find the rule, it's hard to find out what the neural network has found. So anyway, so in those days, I started that way, but then I could not find a general purpose architecture that with few analog chips, because this was all done in analog, because digital was too slow, with analog to be able to create neural networks for general purpose application. We had to do a chip for every application that was too expensive, and also analog is very difficult to design. So if you design it once, one chip takes about 3 years to design instead of 1 year. So you had to have the building blocks had to be multi-purpose, and I could never figure out the general purpose architecture. Today, nobody knows that general purpose architecture either. So it wasn't just a kid's game. It will be found because the brain has columns, so organized with columns, particularly the cortex, so that there is already the idea of essentially a modular system. So it can be done. And in fact, now there are several companies that have started that are trying to create general purpose, neural networks, hardware neural networks, not just simulators. And so it will happen, but that was '86.
So it started as an engineering problem.
It started an engineering problem. I was studying neuroscience. I was studying biology to understand how this stuff works, because obviously it was inspired by the real biological neural network that we have in our brain. And at one point, as I was studying, struck me. I thought, these books they talk about biology, biochemical signals, electrical signals, but I have an experience. I feel these signals. How can these signals be the same as the feelings? They are described, in the text. They describe your science I'm talking about. They describe what happens in the brain as if those signals were equal to your feelings and sensations. Is that the same? Of course not. So where are sensations and feelings coming from? And so I got, wow. I was struck with that. I said, well, it's got to be possible because every scientist tells you that we are machines. The consciousness is a property of a complex machine. So let me see if I can figure out how I can make a computer conscious. Just pure curiosity.
Yes.
Not part of the job, not part of my job description, but in my spare time I was thinking, how can I do it? How can I do it? The more I think about it, the more impossible it is. And I got frustrated, but I wanted to understand it. At the same time, in those days, I was also unhappy. I had reached everything that the world says that if you reach that, you should be happy.
What made you unhappy?
That is the big question. I'm unhappy, and I don't know why I'm happy. I should be happy, and I'm unhappy. What's wrong with this picture? And obviously, that happiness has to do with consciousness, right? So I was very intense in trying to understand what the hell is going on. And then one night I got up. I was in Tahoe with my children, my family, and my wife, and we were skiing during the Christmas holidays. And so it was 89, 90 that winter. And I got up, I don't know, midnight. I wanted to, I was thirsty, so I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water. We had a home up there in Tahoe. And drank the water, went to bed, and I was just waiting to fall back to sleep, just thinking nothing. And all of a sudden I feel from my heart, there is like a beam of energy, which is so powerful. Nothing I never felt in my body was so powerful. Coming up like this. It was white, scintillating, and it was the most profound love that I've ever experienced in my life. But so profound, not to be even, I recognized that it was love, but it was love that was incomprehensible because of the intensity and because it came from me. Not that, for some reason, the idea is that love is, I don't know. I had the wrong ideas about love, but anyway, that was what it was. And then this thing exploded, and all of a sudden, this white scintillating light is everywhere.
So you could see the scintillating lights?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It was
I don't even know if my eyes were open or closed, because this is not an ordinary experience of consciousness. Clearly, right? I didn't take drugs, by the way, so just in case you're wondering, because there are lots of people that say that they have a mystical experience because they took LSD or something.
Have you had something similar before as a mystical experience? And would you consider yourself mystical before this experience?
I don't even consider that mystical as besides the word mystical as a sort of a negative connotation in these days, but so the extraordinary experience of consciousness is a better way, or awakening experience, call it whatever you want. But the point is that when this energy now love is everywhere, right? It's the same thing that was coming from me, now is everywhere. Now the world is love. But watch it. But that was me. The world was me. And that is not a thought, that is an experience. I'm it. But I'm also the observer of it. So how is that possible? How can I observe myself and if myself is out there? What's going on here? Okay? And I understood that that energy is the stuff of which everything is made. So this is the stuff of which space, time, matter, everything that exists is made of that stuff.
How do you call that stuff?
Now I call it music. But that's getting too far. Okay, so that experience, then that was it. Okay, my body in this experience, after this being that came up, the body was vibrating. Every part. So this experience was physical, emotional, love, mental. Everything is made of this stuff. Spiritual. I'm the world. For the first time, I had a spiritual experience, which is the integration of the physical, emotional, and mental. So for the first time, everything is united. Changed like this. I don't know how it lasted. There was no time in that experience. May have been, but I guess about a minute. 1 minute changes your life for better, not for worse. 1 minute can change your life for worse pretty easily. Breaking your head takes 20 seconds. So anyway, so that's that. And since then, I had many other experiences, but only because of that. Then I decided to explore the nature of consciousness, because that experience told me consciousness is not even close to what you have been told it is. What I had figured out up to that point by trying to make a machine conscious wasn't even close to what I experienced. So now, where before I thought that the problem to be solved was this, this big. All of a sudden, the problem to solve is the sky. There is no, you cannot understand what I'm talking about unless you have something like this. What I experienced. It's impossible. It's like me explaining you the taste of an apple when you have never tasted even one fruit. You don't even know the fruits exist. I can write a book about the taste of an apple.
You don't know how to call it.
And you don't know, but you cannot experience it, because you can only experience it when you taste the apple. That's the difference between an experience and intellectual knowledge. We go to school to have intellectual knowledge, not experience. Experience is living something. You live it. Life is living it. Life is not a picture on your cell phone. Now we confuse the simulation of life, or the simulation of reality with reality. This is the biggest problem today. And you kids have to deal with this because now you're told that a picture is like a person. No! A person is a living thing, and your experience is not this skin deep, thing where the virtual is like the real. Plus, life is a quantum phenomenon. You have been told, I have been told, that life was a classical machine. We are machines. No, we're not machines. We are quantum systems. In fact, the word system implies a classical structure. I only use the word organism. We are living organism to make a distinction, just to use another word that is not, that is not corrupted by a classical computer meaning. A classical computer is not a living system. A classical computer that can create another computer inside itself and divide by 2 and become 2 computers, then I have a living system. But a computer cannot do that. You can copy a piece of software inside a computer, but the software and the hardware are 2 separate things. In a living system, software and hardware, first of all, there is no software, but the hardware and the quantum information are one and the same. They are integrated. That's what life is. And that's one of the major battles today, also to make people understand the living organisms are not machines. And therefore, even more so, we are not machines. And it is exactly this problem today that is corrupting the way that we understand reality. And reality is actually mostly a construction of our consciousness. It is the way we transform something here which is not even close to what you think that is out here. Out here, there are unbelievable number of realities superimposed. We pick pieces of it, we create a model, and we appear to project it out, but it's not projected out. You know why? Because the consciousness is a field. It's not a thing in our head, like you're told. It's nothing to do with the brain. The brain is simply an interface between a reality which is quantum and a reality which is classical. And the brain translates the 2. But I am a field, and that's why I see reality out there. If I were a robot, I take information from the world in my, in my retina, in my camera, which is inside of me, and that information is in the memory inside of me. How can I project it out there? I see reality out there. How is that possible? Who put reality there? If there is an outer reality that I pick information from, the reality which is out there will be an image within me, not out there. Why is that? Because we are there. We are in superposition. We are in field in superposition with space and time. And so we construct, as we go from baby to 1 or 2 years old, we construct a model of ourselves and reality in this field. And so the reality which is not me, that I cannot deal with, which is outside my reach, is outside of me. And the reality that I can deal with is me. And so I create both the ego sense and the separation between outer and inner, which then disappear when you have experiences like what I told you, which you see yourself. I saw the field, which is me, in that experience. Of course, it took 25 years to figure that out, because at that time it was just an experience. But now I'm trying to figure out what does it mean? What is telling me about the nature of reality, this experience, you see, and all the others that I had. So
can we talk about something now? We're clearly shifting in a world that is, to some sense also philosophical. That is sometimes we're harder to comprehend because it's not what we're used to dedicate our time.
That's right. I understand. And you see, the problem today is that we believe that we know what's real, and we don't. We're not even close. In fact, the few advanced quantum scientists and physicists and so on, they all have reached that conclusion, that we don't even know what's out there. We thought we did. Classical physics was giving us an image of the world, which was like a movie. I watch a movie and I'm part of it. I'm just an observer of a movie which is going on. whether I open my eyes or close my eyes, still going on. No, it's not that way at all. We are actually we are creating this reality together.
In the interaction.
In this interaction, but in interaction in a field, in a domain which we don't understand today. It's still, there are lots of unknowns today, but what we know is that it's not even close to what we think reality is.
So going with a some order, from that moment of epiphany to what I think you started clearly focusing, and that epiphany was a topical moment also of your current drive. I think that's what you mentioned before, and that's your sharpening also of what is the problem we're trying to address. How is your understanding of consciousness, as you define it, has evolved over these 25 years?
Well, the first, so we talk about 30 years roughly, and so the first 20 of these 30 years were studying, trying to understand by studying myself, with experiments, with going through all kinds of different schools of thoughts, reading books, meditations, you name it. Never drugs, by the way, but trying to really, understand more and more what is it? What is the shape of this animal? How can you put this thing together? And so at that point, I had not decided whether consciousness was fundamental or was still what science was telling us, an epiphenomenon or an emergent property of the brain. Okay? For 20 years, I was, I would say, agnostic about it. I just
gathering information.
I wanted to find out what's going on, okay, before judging. But after 20 years, the conclusion was inescapable. It has to be fundamental. It has to be a property as irreducible as the charge and the spin of electrons in order for us to be conscious at the macroscopic scale. In order to have electricity and magnetism at our scale, you need to have those fundamental properties at the level of the fields. The same with consciousness. You cannot create inner reality out of something that is only outer reality. Consciousness is something that we perceive within ourselves. It is, and it is private. This stuff out here is public. We all share this public reality. But what I feel inside of me can only be translated into symbols, which are actually Boolean symbols, words. And you can understand the words and reconstruct the meaning that I have inside of me through this translation from quantum to Boolean. Okay? But the actual experience within me is quantum. It is a superposition. If one of the first things, but it took about 10 years of meditation to figure it out, is to actually experience a thought before you translate a thought into mental words. Because up until that point, I was always translating, I thought in words, mental words. Then you might translate it to verbal words or written words, but it was, the thought appeared in my brain as words. That's not what a real thought is. Before, if you quiet your mind, the thought is a multidimensional structure where all kinds of things are in superposition, and you see it, but you have to learn how to quiet your mind, and you see it, and then you can, the moment you try to translate it, it's like the collapse of the wave function. You can only make a serial string of symbols, which are the words, to describe this multidimensional thing, and you can only describe one path through this multidimensional thing, and you lose everything else. It's like the collapse of the wave function. Many states in superposition, and when you actually observe something, only one of those states is in the physical reality. So you see it, you experience quantum physics in your head. And on you go. So I don't want to bother you, but it's amazing the kind of stuff that you learn through this process. Okay, so that's when I decided, hey, impossible. This is not something that consciousness is not something that the brain does, and then when the key thing is that when the brain dies, your consciousness is gone, because if the consciousness is a property of the brain, consciousness goes with the brain. And my model now says, no, the brain is a property of consciousness. It's just the
So
opposite.
you've been saying that matter
Is a consequence of consciousness. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll get to that, but before that, there are a few concepts to be kind of clear, right? In other words, reality has two faces. Reality has an inner and an outer face. The inner reality is made of qualia, what something feels. It's called qualia. Qualia. But simultaneously, you know yourself because you have the capacity, fundamental capacity of consciousness to perceive itself, to perceive its own states. But the states are actually in superposition. That is a quantum, is the state of a quantum system. By the way, notice that a state of a quantum system is not clonable. Even in quantum physics, I cannot transfer my state to you. I cannot do that. There is a no cloning theorem that tells you cannot do that. I can only transform that state, quantum state, into a Boolean symbols, which are classical symbols, and then I can. But then when I do that, I only can describe a small portion of what is the feeling, the meaning that I have within me. So I'm trying to now unify the model, unify science, what science knows, and quantum physics is fundamental to this, and it's unbelievably good theory. I don't know if it's sufficient, but for sure it will go a long ways. And spirituality, the fact that we are spiritual entities, not machines. A big difference. Because we are brought up convinced that we are machines. We don't die. The body dies, goes back into particles. Besides, it doesn't even exist when you think of it. But that would take us too far. But the point is that our consciousness, once it comes into existence, is forever. But it is never the same. It keeps on learning itself. Actually transforms and moves and changes. And we are here to experience, so that our consciousness, when I say to experience, who experiences is not the brain, it's the consciousness. The consciousness controls the brain, not the other way around. And on it goes. And so we are here because our consciousness, which is who we are, wants to know itself, wants to learn about itself, wants to grow, wants to experience, understand itself, understand its potential, and so on.
What is the roadmap that you see to get into a better understanding of what consciousness is at the core, which is pretty much what you're working on with the foundation and
absolutely
years and years of development?
Yeah.
How do you see a specific roadmap?
Yeah. So the major obstacle to accept this what I just said as a serious theory, or not even a theory at this point, a serious model or a serious understanding, is the preconceived notions of what reality is, which science is giving us. So science is actually more distant to this view than many religions. But on the other hand, religions, they are dogmatic typically. They don't understand also and they don't appreciate the need for science. So how do you combine the two? And so my decision, I hope is right, is to work to get the most advanced scientists, and most advanced minds in science to accept that this is probably in the right direction. So that they will start working in this direction to really connect the dots and made a fundamental change in our Weltanschauung, because our Weltanschauung is doomed. If we think we are a machine, we will continue to kill each other. We will continue to have havoc in this world because who cares? Machine, we die, gone. That's the way we think about ourselves. Because religion has lost its grip. unless it becomes, fundamentalism and so on, that is even worse than anything. Okay? But religion in the sense, in the true sense, open religion, in the sense of understanding, also, it's so particularly the young people they're not religious anymore. So the new religion is science, and science is telling us that we are machine. So the big obstacle is exactly the viewpoint of science, which today is the authority. So we need to change that, and that's a hard problem. So I need to be as acute with my head in showing that what science is saying is contradicted logically in the beginning, and then with experiments.
How do you prove that? Give us some examples, some experiments on how your physical.
I'm not there yet. I had to have a cognitive structure which is so tight that I can make predictions that can then be tested. I'm not there yet. I've been working for this thing in the sense of trying to get a beginning of a model for about 5 years. People take 15 years to solve a tiny problem like this. I'm changing this new conceptual structure changes every tenet of science.
To me, it's a new discipline by itself.
But it has to be done this way. I don't know any other way, because if you accept the fundamental tenets of science, you can never get to where I believe the reality is, because everything is wrong. It's just everything is the opposite.
So it's a humongous undertaking.
Yeah, it is a humongous undertaking. But
who are your partners in that?
But I have a number of colleagues that believe like me that this is probably the right direction. I'm not sure 100%, but in my heart I am sure, because those experiences bring a knowing which is unbelievably so clear that it has to be not the details but the essence of it. It has to be this. That those experiences that connect, where everything is actually coherent. The physical body was coherent with the emotions, it was coherent with the mental, and was coherent with the spiritual. Wow! Man, rarely did you have even the physical and the emotional that are coherent in any kind of regular experience. So this is experience, not a thought. Not I woke up in the morning and thinking, what if those things could become coherent? What would that happen? That's a thought. But when you experience it, when you eat an apple, you know that you're eating an apple. The apple may be something else, but you know that you're experiencing that thing. It's part of you. You're living that thing. That's the difference between an intellectual knowing that I mentioned before and actually experiencing something. That's the foundation. The foundation is what is experience. Only consciousness allows you to live your life. Live it as an experience, as a lived experience. And that is the key.
So this is more than fascinating.
This can go on
for hours and hours. So unfortunately, we need to stop it there. Just as a hint, for people that are becoming passionate about the same topics you're addressing, what suggestions do you have? Is there any material, interface, people to talk to? What are the resources today?
I wrote a book, for now it's only in Italian, called Silicio, from the invention of microprocessor to the new science of consciousness. And that's in Italian, however. But there will be, in a number of months, certainly
Just
this year, there will be an English version.
What we call Silicio?
What we call silicon, and from the invention of microprocessor to the same title, but in English. And so that book tells about my life, but it tells about some of my experiences, including the one that I gave you, so that it's black and white. And then it talks about the model that I'm developing, so the beginning of it. So it's just that you asked me for a book. If you know Italian, you can read it even now. By Silicio is Amazon.it. You can have it.
And soon in the. Grazie Federico, it's a pleasure.